And joining us now to discuss Trump's tariffs is Spencer Morrison, author of Reshore: How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Also joining us is Javier Palomarez, President and CEO of the United States Hispanic Business Council. So good morning to you both. Spencer, I'd like to start with you here. Just give us your initial thoughts here. How do you feel about these sweeping reciprocal tariffs?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the program. These tariffs are necessary, and they've been a long time coming. America has run a large chronic trade deficit every single year since 1974. The cumulative value of that trade deficit, when we adjust for inflation, is about $25 trillion. It's almost a whole year's worth of GDP. That's money that's been shipped abroad. That's jobs that are gone, industry that's hollowed out. So these tariffs are a long time coming. We need them to rebalance the asymmetrical trade relationships that we have, with these countries all over the world, in particularly China.
And Javier, what do you think about these tariffs?
I agree with Spencer that tariffs can be a useful negotiation tool. I also agree that we should have a very keen focus on the trade imbalance and trade in general with China. I'm not as agreeable when it comes to the tactics that are being used in negotiating with specifically Canada and Mexico. So I think there is a place for tariffs. I certainly see the negotiation tactic, but I think that we need to be very careful in terms of where we go from here, particularly with our two closest allies, that being Mexico and Canada.
Yeah, Spencer, what do you think about that, imposing tariffs on key U.S. allies?
Yeah, I agree with my friend. I believe the focus of the tariff policy really ought to be on China and the European Union, which the European Union, for example, was specifically designed to prey on the American market. And the Chinese trade policies in particular were designed specifically to take advantage of U.S. markets. With respect to the trade balances between Canada, Mexico, and the States, I think there's a little more room for nuance. The economies are certainly very integrated, but I would also like to point out the reality, especially on the Canadian side of the border, is that the relationship is not symmetrical. Yes, there's a free trade agreement in place that doesn't cover everything, and the Canadians have imposed all sorts of non-monetary barriers to access for American products. So I think if the goal of the reciprocal tariffs today, which I think it is to rebalance trade so that it's fair and symmetrical, I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think Canada and Mexico are guilty uh, of preying on America's market as well. But I do think, as my friend has pointed out, there are other political relationships that need to be considered in doing so. But ultimately, the president's got to put America first, right?
Yeah, I mean, Javier, what do you think about that? Do you feel like there's a risk that Trump's tariffs may be too broad and that it needs more precision?
Absolutely. Again, I want to start again by saying that there is a place for negotiation, and tariffs need to be part of the toolkit, if you will. But keep in mind that nothing happens in a vacuum. Canada's already signed an oil deal with China. That could have been an oil deal with America. And so as we move forward here, two things to consider. Mexico and Canada are number one and number two trade partners. Mexico, in particular, is the number one or number two trade partner to 39 of America's states. And so there's an interdependency that needs to exist, a symbiotic relationship that we've enjoyed. I don't argue that it has been a bit one-sided and lopsided in favor of the partners and not America specifically. So while I agree that we need to recalibrate, I think it needs to be done surgically through diplomacy, not with a sledgehammer. Doing those kinds of things alienates the partner, alienates these nations, and frankly, they will find a solution, either reciprocal taxes or tariffs on our exports and or relationships with themselves, excluding us. At the end of the day, it's the American family and the American small business community that can either benefit from good negotiation or be hurt by bad negotiation. And so I caution, I think diplomacy, I think that open dialogue between us and the trade partners certainly is necessary, but blanket tariffs across the board have hardly ever worked, and I don't think will work today.
Okay, Spencer, let's also talk about the purpose of these tariffs. And one of them is to try to reduce the trade deficit. How effective will that be? Tell us.
Well, I'll tell you what. I just like to make one response to what my friend has said. So I'm a lawyer. I've reviewed these free trade agreements. These free trade agreements with all the regulations and all of the stuff that goes along with them. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of pages of documents that regulate every aspect of every product, and they indicate that, X amount of products need to be made in America, X amount of products need to be made in Mexico, X amount of products need to be made in Canada. These aren't free trade agreements. What they're doing is they're allocating economic production between the three nations, and they're incredibly complicated. What I like about the tariffs is that they're simple and they're transparent. If you bring products into the States, you're going to pay 25%. You're going to pay 30%, whatever it's going to be, right? As opposed to these free trade agreements that on paper it says, oh, we've got free trade. But you know what? When you actually look at the documents, it makes them enormously complicated, and the trade is anything but free. So the tariffs are going to make everything a lot more simple. If you're shipping products into the country, you're paying X amount. That's it. So I like it because it's transparent, and consumers and producers know what we're getting into with tariffs, as opposed to these so-called free trade agreements.
So, Spencer, you think these tariffs will lead to better trade situations, better trade deals for the U.S.?
Yeah, certainly, and they're going to do that in two ways. Number one, as Javier has said, the tariffs are a really great negotiating tool. There's a lot of money on the line because America runs a trade deficit with these countries, right? So they're profiting enormously off of trade with America in an asymmetrical way. So, the buyer, what's the saying? The customer is always right. We're the customer. We're right. We have a lot of leverage in this relationship. So we can use tariffs to get a better deal. But not only that, and this is a point I make in my book, is that tariffs are going to reshore these factories and we've already seen it happening, right? If a company wants to sell the product in America, they either have to pay a tax to get it in, or they got to build it in America. Most people don't like paying taxes, right? So they're going to bring their factories back. They're going to reshore the factories into America. They're going to create lots of jobs, lots of investment, and it's going to help make America rich again.
Okay, Javier, I'll end with you here. So if the tariffs encourage trading partners to potentially lower their own tariffs, and I think this is one of the purposes that Trump is imposing these levies, right? Wouldn't that be a win-win scenario for everyone?
Absolutely, it would be a win-win. I would just put a final point on Spencer's argument that the customer is always right. It's important to remember that when it comes to what we're talking about right now, there are two customers in this relationship. Certainly, we're a customer when we're importing these goods, and we should tariff when necessary. But conversely, they are going to tariff everything we export to them. So we need to keep that in mind. Secondly, tariffs alone won't solve the issue. They won't create the panacea that we're hoping for. We need to continue to invest in American innovation, in education, educating the workforce of the future. We need to incent companies to keep manufacturing here. So again, I think tariffs are good. They're a good negotiation tool, but they need to be part of a toolkit that includes many other things, not by themselves.
Oh, all right. Thank you both, Javier, Spencer. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on the program.